Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Hannah-Beth Luke, the coordinator of our major in regenerative agriculture as a part of our Bachelor of Science program at Southern Cross University. I'd like to first acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, live, and study, and the critical role of the elders, past, present, and emerging in the work that we do and the study that we do. Now, I'd like to give a very warm welcome to Dr. Charlie Massey and to Damon Gameau, who are joining us today for a panel discussion on regenerative agriculture. Damon Gameau, who wrote the book 2040 Handbook for the Regeneration, and famously also the film that many of you may have already seen. And Charlie Massey, who wrote The Call of the Reed Warbler, which many of you will have already read or be reading or be wanting to read into the future. The program for the day is going to be, Damon's going to be presenting on his work and his thoughts on regenerative agriculture. And then there'll be some time for questions to Damon, and then there'll be a bit of a panel discussion between Charlie and Damon, and lots of opportunity for students to ask questions at the end. Thanks, everyone. Damon, thank you again so much, and over to you.
Thanks, Hannah-Beth, and thanks everyone for joining. So I'll probably just give a bit of a talk today that I often share. Some of you will probably be familiar with some of these things, but I don't think it hurts to hear it again. Especially right now, I do think we've got an opportunity where we are right now to really throw up some radical ideas and new thoughts. Now is the time to share those while we've paused our current extractive system. And I think that, as many of you will know, regenerative agriculture provides a really wonderful opportunity as we re-emerge. So investment in this area would be really valuable. So I usually just start by just basically outlining where we're at in a planet sense. Our giant spaceship that is hurtling through the galaxy at about 100,000 kilometers an hour. And as many of you will know, the reason we're able to gather here today and have these discussions is because of something called the carbon cycle. And the carbon is found predominantly in 5 areas around our planet. It's in our soils, as we know, it's in animals and plants, it's in the ocean, it's buried underground as fossil fuels, and it's also found in our atmosphere. And over the last 150 years, we've broken the balance of that carbon cycle. So we've taken those fossil fuels that are buried underground and we've put them into our delicate atmosphere. And you can see even from this video how thin that atmosphere is. It's actually thinner than the skin of an apple by comparison. And we put somewhere around 25 billion tons of carbon into that atmosphere every year. Interestingly, even I was reading this morning that experts are predicting our global emissions are going to drop by about 6% this year. But I guess we've got to be careful because they dropped after the GFC in 2008 and 2009, but then they went up by 5% the following year. So we might decrease by 6%, but to actually meet our Paris goals, we've got to drop by 7% every year till we reach 2030. So we've got to find, as we re-emerge from this pause, ways of keeping that air clean and keeping those fossil fuels buried underground so we're not putting them up into the atmosphere. But as you know, I'm sure that even if we did that tomorrow, if we went to clean transport and clean energy and we had no fossil fuels going into that atmosphere, we would still have increased warming on the planet for the next few decades or several decades because of the carbon and other greenhouse gases that we've already put into that atmosphere. So while we stop putting them up, we have to also start sequestering, drawing down or removing them from the atmosphere. And as many of you will know, that's why regenerative agriculture is just so important, because that is one of the things that we can do. So, but climate change really is a symptom. I think the planet has a fever. Since the early 1900s, it's risen by about 1 degree. And if our bodies have a fever, they also rise by about 1 degree. And when that happens, we go to a doctor, we get feedback that tells us to slow down, to stop, and to change our ways. And that's really what we're facing right now. But climate change, even though it's getting all the attention in the media, is really only one symptom. There's lots of other symptoms that we need to listen to. Our oceans are now 30% more acidic than they were 150 years ago. The UN says we've only got 60 years of topsoil left. Our populations of mammals, birds, fish and reptiles have on average declined by 60% since the 1970s. Income inequality is at record highs, and we're on track to having more plastic in the ocean than fish by 2050. And I'd add to that even we saw last week that the Great Barrier Reef just had its third major bleaching event in the last 5 years, which is again a sign of how increasingly warming our oceans are and other factors at play. So really we stand at a precipice, at a fork in the road in terms of how we behave. We are on track absolutely to follow in the path of other great civilizations, the Mesopotamians, the Romans, the Sumerians, all of who really failed to neglect and take care of their natural resources. And that's what we're doing right now. And just to quickly explain why that's happened, I think that in a lot of ways, the cause of these problems is that we've created this system that is largely based on extraction, on competition and rivalry. We're often fighting and we're pitted against each other in different ways. And this was developed because a lot of people argued it based and mimicked natural processes, that it was Darwin's evolution model, that a certain product or a company would make it through, the one that didn't resonate with everyone would drop away, then those companies would combine with each other and form stronger and stronger bonds and create these hierarchies. And this is why we have only a small amount of companies that are controlling our food, a small amount of companies controlling our media and our data. They've been pushed to the top. But even though we justify this behavior and say it's what happens in nature, what's often excluded is that nature, although it has a competitive framework, it also exists in actually a symbiotic frame. So a great example is something like a shark hunting a fish. That yes, there's competition there, but they've actually both evolved, the shark and the fish, at a very similar rate. If the shark suddenly evolved faster than the fish, it would actually hunt all the fish, it would kill the fish, and then it itself would die. So they've evolved at a very similar rate, so occasionally the fish gets away and there's an equilibrium there. What we do as humans, which no other animal has available to it, is we've developed tools and technology that allow us to be exponentially greater predators than other things in the wild. So we can have all the fish hunting skills that the shark has, but we develop a super trawler that's able to hunt all the fish, hundreds of tons in one go, and not even just be confined to one part of the ocean. We can move to other parts of the ocean in different climates and hunt there. So we've completely knocked ourselves out of balance with our natural world. And this is why we're getting the feedback that we're getting right now. We're consuming 100 billion metric tons of resources every year now on this planet. That's metals, minerals, fish, plastics, forests, fossil fuels. But at a sustainable level, the Earth can only replenish 50 billion. So we're doubling that use. And we're on track to consume 180 billion by 2050, which would wipe out most living systems. And unfortunately, of that 100 billion metric tons each year, we're only recycling or reusing about 9%. So we have this incredibly wasteful, extractive system that is just leading us right to the edge of the cliff. And that's what I'm talking about before. So this pause that we're having right now in our system is a great moment to reflect on what we're doing. I mean, we've been brought to our knees by this tiny little microscopic virus, but actually it's revealing to us all these other flaws in our system, that we're incredibly fragile. We've become so efficient and we try to extract every last dollar out of this system that it makes us very vulnerable to these type of shocks. And these shocks are going to keep happening. We're going to keep having pandemics. We're going to keep having bushfires and other climate events. So we need to build much more resilience into the system. Otherwise, we're really going to fall apart. So what I've been doing for the last 5 years is basically traveling the world looking for the best solutions. How do we shift from this competitive, rivalrous, extractive system to one that is more symbiotic and interconnected and has much more benefits to all of life, not just us as humans? And so I call that film 2040. Some of you might have seen it, but it's ostensibly a letter to my daughter, which shows her what the world could look like in 2040 if we put into practice these solutions, all these best solutions. And I call it an exercise in fact-based dreaming. And the reason I made it was basically in response to all the nihilistic and negative stories we hear about our future, this sort of apocalyptic narrative that we've got going on in the media that sort of says, or even our Hollywood films, that shows a future that's devoid of nature, often where humans living in slums being chased by robots. And I just thought it was important to have an intervention on that storytelling, because they're the images that we're putting into the subconscious of our children and everyone really. And I think it's important to say that doesn't have to be our future. We do have choices and things and options we can take right now that will make our future far more inhabitable and beneficial to all living things. And I was very much inspired by a quote by an author named Raymond Williams. And he said that to be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing. So I think, as many of you will attest, we've just bashed each other over the head with how bad things are. And any psychologist I've spoken to, especially in the environmental space, have said that we have this thing called a window of tolerance. And there's only so much negative, bad news we can take. And so a lot of films and storytelling kind of worked in the 90s and early 2000s because we weren't as exposed to these things, but people have just been using that narrative ever since. And so we're completely overloaded with so many issues to care about, and it just gets too much. And so we disengage. So I think it's really important now that we start to tell stories differently. We start to inspire people. We start to show them what it could look like on the other side of this crisis and really outline the benefits to their lives. And I think regenerative agriculture is probably one of the most exciting solutions I found, if not the most exciting, because it really clearly shows that shift from what has been fighting nature. And you think of the way we've got our food traditionally or recently has been that we plant monocrops when nature thrives on diversity. We're using chemicals to control our pests and weeds. So we're fighting nature. We're constantly ploughing and destroying that soil, which is releasing all the carbon into the atmosphere, but also breaking down all that precious life within the soil. So it's a very fighting frame worldview. Whereas what we're shifting to now with regenerative agriculture is much more symbiotic and interconnected. It's working with nature. And then when we do that, we get all these incredible benefits, as I'm sure a lot of you have started studying already. Here's an example I often use, which is such a really clear example. This comes from the University of Alberta in Canada. They've done a study over the last 10 years, and they're just about to release their findings. And these two soil samples are taken from identical paddocks, like or side by side, exactly the same landscapes. And the soil you can see on the right has been the more traditional set stocking methods. So just, keeping the animals on the land, letting them roam however they like. And then you can see the soil on the left there was using rotational grazing, which I'm sure you've all learnt about, carefully managing the animals to eat the grass. And as soon as they start nibbling on that, it's a powerful signal for the roots to start growing again. And it starts pulling all that carbon from the atmosphere that's doing us damage and starts putting it into the soil. And the incredible thing that happens there, as I'm sure you know, is all the life that starts there, the microorganisms in that soil on the left, the darker soil. And those microorganisms just play such a crucial role, in particular in solubilizing the minerals to make them bioavailable for the plant. So really, it's as simple as this, that we can't have human health without plant health, and we can't have plant health without soil health. And you can see the difference there. The vibrancy in that soil is just so obvious. The other element here is, which has really, I guess, taken me by surprise in this journey, is understanding the role of animals. I know that there's such a binary argument out there at the moment of sort of meat versus anti-meat. We're seeing the rise of all these, lab-grown meats, which are ostensibly, I think, just fast food, really. And I think we've got the lesson on fast processed foods. But what is emerging is using animals in really careful ways that will not only pull that carbon out of the atmosphere into the soil, but also then bring to life all these nutrients. Their feces, their urine, the way they move around the landscapes are just so crucial to regenerating these landscapes. In fact, we can't do it without animals. And I've even met, in making the film, quite a few vegan farmers that are using their animals in this way. Whether we eat them or not, we need animals back on the landscapes. And this is a practice which is emerging. Involve animals in environment have some type of legume, like a leucaena in this example. The animals will eat the leaves and grow back. And the tannins in the leaves also help with the methane with the animal here. And then there's actual timber incorporated into the paddock at the same time. And if you look at a traditional holistic management process, studies show that about 2 to 3 tons of carbon per hectare per year can be absorbed. If you look at just organic veggies, it's about 1 to 2 tons of carbon per hectare per year. But when you start doing these intensive silvopasture practices, you can get up to like 26 tons per hectare of carbon, which is an extraordinary figure. And again, why these type of practices are so crucial moving forward in terms of regenerating our landscapes and mitigating or reversing the impacts of climate change. But not just animals. I think you're going to meet Rex Harris this afternoon, who's a macadamia farmer up near in northern New South Wales. And he's a really interesting study where he took out every second row of his macadamia trees, you can see here, to let in the sunlight. But then in between each row of trees, he decided to plant a range of cover crops. So the lab, he's got vetch in there, lavender. So all the biodiversities come back again, all the bees and the insects, and also the water retention, which I'll get to in a minute. So you can see the vibrancy and the life on that farm there. I mean, this is the opposite of this extractive fighting nature. This is the life that comes back to the farm, the yield's improved, and the quality of his food is going to be greatly improved. And this is what we need to be aiming for. This is how we should be eating our food, because that health of that landscape translates directly to our own health. Our gut bacteria, our microbiome that's found all over our body is this very similar to what's in the soil. So we need that correlation, again, to create this human health. But the other really great point about these practices, and Rex can talk about this on his farm, is the water retention element, which is just extraordinary. And that was one of the big parts of the film 2040 when people saw it that they really responded to. People were quite surprised that once you get that soil carbon full, it acts like a sponge again and starts to really hold the water. And this is really important as we move forward. As we get more impacts of climate change, the hotter air holds more water. That's why we're getting much stronger and more intense weather events right around the world. We've seen a 50% increase in those kind of intense storm events around the world. So we need to be able to hold that water. If we don't hold that water on our landscapes, it's going to run off and cause all sorts of damage and erosion. And there's a terrific scientist named Walter Jenné, and he has a great analogy where he says, if you condensed every rainfall in Australia down to just 100 drops of rain, that 2 of those drops are caught in dams on our landscape. So even if we started building more dams, even if we doubled our dams, we're only going to get 4 drops of that 100, which is just ridiculous. About 36 drops of those hundreds go into transpiration, so into the trees as they grow. And then 50 of those drops are washed off the landscapes and run away, or they evaporate. So the way to actually hold that rain from those storms is to capture it in our landscapes. And this is where putting carbon back in the soil is so important. So I'll just show you a quick video. It's a small excerpt from 2040 that just explains this in a bit more detail. And hopefully it won't skip. Let me know if it's not playing properly.
But as our climate becomes increasingly volatile, this type of farming has one more crucial advantage.
For every 1% increase in carbon to 30 centimetres, we increase the water holding capacity of soil by 166,000 litres per hectare on every rainfall event.
When it rains, the soil on the left, with more carbon and organic matter, absorbs the water and less runs off the top. Whereas the chemical-ridden soil on the right absorbs almost no water and allows it to run off, taking the chemicals with it into nearby rivers and waterways.
That's the way we can buffer against droughts and dry seasons. Grasslands all around the world, they virtually had a built-in irrigation system.
Yeah, and so you can see why you've probably heard Scott Morrison and others, especially after our drought last year, really talking about we need to double the amount of dams in our country and build more dams. But you can see from this is just the crazy way to go. What we need to do is create resilience moving forward and put that water into the landscape. Now, what's very exciting, probably in the last few weeks, or just before all the corona madness started, there was a study that came out from the South Dakota State University that kind of didn't get enough traction that it should have. But they spent quite a long time comparing 20 regenerative farms versus 20 conventional plots and looking at the differences in those two practices. And they found that the regenerative plots were actually 78% more profitable than the conventional plots. And the main reason was that there was a huge decrease in the inputs required on those regenerative practices. People were using less and less chemicals, but also that there was a demand for the healthier products at end of market. And I think this is a really important point moving forward, that we've taken the film obviously to various parts around the world now. And one was at the United Nations, the Climate Action Summit in New York last September. And a lot of discussion there was around these emerging technologies we're going to see in the next couple of years, where you'll be able to scan a barcode on a food item, and not only will you be able to see the supply chain of a certain food, but you'll be able to see the vitamin and mineral quality, how healthy the soil was, how the animals were treated. There's already experiments now with fish, so you can see the supply chain. But everyone is envisaging a world where farmers won't be paid on weight, but they'll be paid on the vitamin and mineral quality of their food. And this is going to be completely transformative, especially as the young generation comes through and starts demanding more environmentally sustainable foods and healthier foods as that awareness starts to grow. So this will force a lot of companies into doing things differently. In fact, it's already going on. We've seen even General Mills, which is a huge company in America that make a lot of like Cheerios and other cereals. They've pledged to have 1 million acres of regenerative agriculture farmland by 2030. We're seeing Patagonia, they want to switch to only using regenerative organic materials in their clothes by 2022. And all sorts of other companies behind the scenes are scrambling to sort of start looking at some of these changes. So these things are going to move quite quickly, especially as that the viability of that story starts to get more and more coverage. And as you know, more farmers are sort of really practices now, especially after the fires we've suffered, and they're starting to realise that, you know, often it's a crisis that forces the change. And I've been privy to some really interesting farm tours even recently, and just hearing the questions that farmers are asking is really encouraging, and seeing 200, 250 people or farmers on that farm tour that might have only had sort of 30 or 25 farmers do that a couple of years ago is obviously very encouraging. So I'm aware I don't have a lot of time, so I guess I just really want to get the point across that we are at a fork in the road. And it's just wonderful that you are studying this and learning about this, because we desperately need these sort of solutions implemented and shared widely. That every decision we make right now, every purchase, every food choice, every investment either takes us faster and faster towards the edge of that cliff, or actually takes us off into a new, more unknown, but more exciting pathway that actually gives our children a better chance and gives this planet a chance of having a fundamentally fruitful, rich, and more enjoyable future. So I congratulate you all for taking up this journey. It's incredibly exciting. And as you probably know, once you start going down the rabbit hole, it's very hard to pull yourself out of it. I certainly loving being immersed in it. So thanks for listening. And I'm happy to take any questions. And then we're very lucky, obviously, to have Charlie here, who is just a very special human in this space.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Damon, for taking the time to come and speak to us at Southern Cross University today. Mm-hmm. And it's always wonderful to hear your positive take on how we can, how many things there are that we can do to improve the state of our environment and our world. So thanks again.
No worries.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And Charlie, did you? I might send over to you. Did you have anything you wanted to speak to Damon about, or any questions particularly before we open for any questions to the rest of our students?
No, other than just having seen the film, and I know the way it's working, it's just a terrific way to reach a lot more generations, and to also endorse what Damon said. Yeah, the problems are obvious, but the solutions are exciting. And I know Damon and myself, we work with Paul Hawken, who's now working on his next book, which he says is his most important, which is called Regeneration. Mm-hmm. And we have some of the best solutions to these big planetary crises. You know, there's 9 disturbed systems, not just one. Everyone gets focused on climate, but there's 9. And we've got the best solutions, regenerative agriculture, to at least 6 of the major biogeophysical systems. That's a hell of a news story, and it's a great space to be in. And as you've noticed, the people working in it are passionate and committed, and wow, it's a lot different to when I started. There were no courses like this, and it was all negativity.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just say, add to that, Charlie, to that. So yeah, I mean, this is obviously one small section, and there's just so many solutions out there. And Paul and I actually I'm doing the series of regeneration we're working on at the moment. And the challenge is that there are just so many things out there, and it's so encouraging that we're just spoiled. We've just got to find ways to amplify them, get them seen, get people talking about them. That's our big challenge, is the storytelling element, because we're fighting a narrative that's very, very controlled at the moment, especially in our country, as we know. So how do we get these stories through and actually get people excited about them, I think, is the big challenge, because we have everything we need. It's just about now communicating them.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Can I ask a question of both of you? Thank you so much, Damon, for a very energizing and fascinating account of what your movie's about and what you're talking about. And also, thanks also, Charlie, for taking the trouble to put down the recording that I hope the students have had access to. We only managed to get it online yesterday. But the question I wanted to put to both of you is, the regenerative space becomes, from the outside, gets viewed often as like a bubble, almost an evangelical, almost semi-religious kind of bubble for people from the outside, and creates a them and us kind of feel. I just wanted what your response was to that, and what you think the regenerative movement needs to do to work with that environment.
Do you want to go, Damon?
Yeah, but I think you'll have the better answer than me. But I would just say, from my experience, and obviously coming from outside the world, is the crucial thing there is to meet people where they're at, and whether that's a fossil fuel worker who's been doing something a certain way for a long time for a reason and has really believed in that. I think we have to humanize this topic the best way we can, and to sort of just impose these new solutions on people and say, this is the way to do it, and you've got to do this or you're going to destroy the planet. That is not the way to do it. And I think we have to really connect with people where they're at and understand that this is about security and about what they value and looking after their children, their families, and actually talk at that level and not preach this stuff. And I'm sure Charlie can attest to lots of farmers in that space that sort of know about this but are reluctant for a range of reasons, and because they've been told a different story for a long time. And it is, challenging to take a risk and try something new. And I've certainly seen that in a lot of different industries. So I think the more we can just be the less activist about this and the more human we can be about this, we've got a much better chance of bringing more people along for the journey.
Yeah, I totally endorse that. I mean, the phenomena of sort of the enthusiasm and exhilaration of changing paradigm, that's well known. And I think that's part of what we're seeing, that, and it's, as I showed in my writings, it's usually at least 50% of change is due to major life shocks that cracks your mind open. And with that then goes that sort of, the enthusiasm, the excitement of that whole new paradigm. But I think hopefully we are now moving past that. There's a lot of bridging. We certainly don't want to reject the best of the so-called worst aspects of regenerative agriculture. We need the machinery and the thinking and the good agronomy and all those sorts of things. We have to build a joint path, not a them and us situation. And I think that's starting to emerge when you look at technologies like multi-species cover cropping, etc. It's a slow gradation where you're using the same machinery, etc., slightly adapted, and column size with pasture cropping's done the same. All you're doing is just increasing the complexity of your biodiversity system, and all that comes back to one of my opening slides, that we're just enabling nature rather than putting the lid on her and suppressing her. What we're doing is enabling her to self-organise and do what she does best, which is create diversity and all those other exciting things. So yeah, we definitely don't want a them and us situation, because we've got a lot to benefit from the past history of agriculture. And let's not forget, principles we're talking about aren't new. A lot of them are bloody old. Right back to a lot of our indigenous and early agricultural cultures who were, focused on diversity and healthy soil. So it's got to be collective, not them and us.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for that. Also, I'm interested, Damon, in what responses you are getting from your movie. What's the shape of that response? How do people respond? And what you see coming from that?
Yeah, I mean, probably. So there's a few facets to that. So there's obviously the box office viewing, eyeballs on the film. That's one element, which has been quite wonderful. It's already one of the highest grossing docos all time in this country. But just the people that have seen it has been, from energy companies to banks to school kids, politicians overseas, world leaders, certain like bands that have used clips on their stage shows. U2 in particular was quite amusing, just taking clips of the film. That element's been lovely. But I'd say the most encouraging for me is to see the follow through of people that have not only seen the film, but then gone to our website, activated their own plan. We sort of created with 50 different organisations ways for people to take action and get involved, from signing up and volunteering to donating money, whatever they could do in their own world. And that has just been probably the most encouraging. So we've had, we've raised, almost $1 million to build this seaweed farm down in Tasmania in Storm Bay. We're working with the University of Tasmania there. That's up and running now, all the kelps in the water, which is again an incredible way to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere, is to grow these seaweed farms out at sea. So we're now doing the first test down there, which is great. And that's just happened because of people giving $10 or $20 donations. The same with a microgrid. We raised almost $1 million for a microgrid setup. We've had 950,000 kids around Australia have now accessed and used our curriculum materials. So we have 31 free lesson plans for teachers. And then in the regen ag space, we work with a group called Carbon8, and they've had nearly 400 farmers sign up to that. And the public are able just to give a donation of $8 a month. And that money, the farmer gets paid for every percentage of carbon they add to the soil. So there's been a terrific appetite for there, and they've raised almost 100,000 just again from people's donations. And now we've had some interest from other groups and even government groups to see how they can support that. JB Hi-Fi, some other corporates have added that to their staff giving program so that they can really help farmers in a proper way to switch to these practices. So there's a ton of things like that. They continue to roll on. The film's doing very well overseas now. And as I've said, I've just now started this new project with Paul Hawken. We're trying to sort of just take this whole platform of regeneration into a much bigger space and a much more global movement to get people talking about it. So I think it's just struck at the right time, and also I think is very strong evidence that people want solutions and they want hope, that we can't keep overwhelming them anymore, that that hope is actually translating into action and tangible action. And I think that's the way we've got to communicate moving forward.
Fantastic. I know there's a few questions from students. So Hannah-Beth, can you manage that?
Yeah, so first of all, there was a question from Chris, and then there was a question from Ian. So I'll just turn your, Chris, where did you go? Oh, Ian, sorry, first. I'll just unmute you if you wanted to ask a question. Oh.
Guys, Damon, great work. I've recently helped Guzman y Gomez transform their supply chain to remove ingredients of concern out of their food, so preservatives, additives, etc., etc. On the back of that, we increased sales by 20%, which was fantastic. So we know that there's real demand from consumers for healthier fast food. What I'm now doing is I want to work with other suppliers to actually go beyond clean food to transform their supply chains to make sure they're sourcing raw materials from regenerative practices. Now, what I'm trying to do is establish what's the business case for them to do it. And there's lots of different data points. Yes, we can review your supply chain, understand the farming practices by which where you source them, and then say, right, they've increased their carbon by X. They now retain Y more water, and there's a nutritional value to that. But I want to be able to go into the CEO of McCain's and say, right, I want to quantify that, and I want to be able to put some metrics around that. And yeah, just keen to get your insights on how to do that.
You want to go, Damon?
Yeah, I mean, I'd let you, Charlie, can probably talk about some of the challenges with, robust soil testing and biodiversity testing. I'm not sure whether that's exactly there yet. Charlie can speak to that, but it's great to hear, mate, and congratulations what you've done already with Gomez and what you're trying to do. And I would just say that what's exciting is this is going on behind the scenes at a lot of large companies around the world, and particularly in Australia, even since the bushfires, a lot of people are asking this exact question because there is demand for it. And that's what gives me so much hope, is this generation coming through have got a very different mindset, and they're asking for different things. And one of the best stories was even at the Climate Action Summit, that the CEO of Maersk, which is the biggest shipping company in the world and transport, huge carbon footprint, he said they've gone zero emissions by 2045 because they actually can't get staff out of the European universities anymore. The students are just saying, why would we work for you when you're destroying our future? So that sort of groundswell that's coming from beneath is just so encouraging. I think we're going to see the same with the food. That's going to shift things very quickly. So I'm not exactly sure yet on there's no that I'm aware of proper metric that supports this. We've been working with another group that are trying to do this very diligently, and they haven't reached a point yet. There's some areas that you can do it quite well, but in terms of really understanding it properly, I don't think we're quite there yet. But Charlie, you might want to talk about what are the best case examples of the soil testing, for example, that exist at the moment.
Yeah, and thanks. That's a good question. Deal with the food first. I know that there's, the key issue we know, if you kill the biology of the soil, things like mycorrhizal or fungi that can source huge amounts of nutrients, micronutrients, phytochemicals, etc. If you harm that soil, well, then you end up with food that's really pretty much nutrient bereft or empty. except for some of the overdoses of chemicals we give it. And that's one of the key factors in a lot of the modern health diseases. The effect on the microbiome, triggering epigenetic negative effects, is huge. So what's on the threshold is some new instrumentation to measure nutrient density or variety, and beyond just the sugar measurement, the Brix measurement. So that they're close to coming. I think when that's sort of really perfected and road tested, it's going to be a game changer. I mean, you can imagine going down a supermarket aisle with one of those devices today, and there'd be a fair few very low scores compared to the beautiful organic food out on the farmer's market. So that's got to be refined. And the carbon, as Damon alluded to, a carbon measurement, it's still nebulous a little bit. There's a lot of research, huge millions of dollars going into developing it. I'm not fully up to speed on it. I haven't worked in this area, but I know there's still problems in repeatability. And that's why I think some of the early carbon farming options are going for deep-rooted shrubs, because it's a lot easier than some of the ephemeral behaviour of sort of grassland landscapes or cropping landscapes. So when they refine both those, they're going to be great tools. But I would think from your retailer point of view or company point of view that, both of them in tandem will be powerful tools when they're ready.
Yeah, and it's just trying to say, look, how do we create a business case for you to justify this? And I listen to a lot of your videos and talks and amazing reference points and sort of big data points, but then how do I sort of bring that back down to an individual supply chain level and analyze that? So yeah, I'll watch that space. I think I'll have to watch keenly.
Well, I hope you're going to be in that space then, because you're up to speed by the sound of it.
Yeah, no, it's happening. I'm actively, so McCain are interested in having the chat. There's even a brand, a hair care brand, where they, source almond oil, macadamia nut oil from Australia. So it'll be interesting to talk to Rex to go, okay, how do we help a brand like that source your raw material and then talk about that, the benefits of that, and then how does that then correlate to sales? So it's early days, but certainly really keen to sort of listen to you guys as the experts.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. That's a great question. Now ask Chris. You had a question next, then over to Bronwyn. I've unmuted you, Chris. I think it's C Doors. I'm not quite. I think it's Chris.
Oh, that's Clark.
Oh, sorry.
To say you unmuted me, and anyway, so, what was my question? Oh, the question was about the labeling, Damon. What information did you have on that exactly, as far as how far they've gotten? I've just had a couple of people tell me that there were already trials on the barcodes for the cotton industry and MLA, Meat and Livestock Australia, and Red Meat was a demonstration of trial mode. But yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
The two versions I'm aware of that have had success are, there's one in Taiwan. They've been trialing for the last year and a half, and it's not quite down to soil health yet, but you can tell whether an animal's been vaccinated and what vaccines it was given. Also the supply chains along its delivery. And WWF in Australia have worked with one of the fishing organisations, I think it might be Tassel, around, again, the robust supply chains, using a blockchain to really find out where the fish were caught, what the methodology was used to catch the fish. So those are the two ones I'm aware of. But all the conversations, like I said, in New York were about this, once that sort of soil testing, the biodiversity testing, mineral and nutrients, once that becomes more robust, and they're predicting that to happen in the next 2 or 3 years, that will be quite transformative, as Charles said, in terms of being available to any company and to a consumer to have that access. You might be familiar, there is a sort of a Brix meter you can get at the moment, but it's sort of, which looks at the sugars of the food, but it doesn't really have detail that we're talking about here. So they are just being trialed at the moment, but like I said, the two that I'm aware of would be in Taiwan and WWF.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie,
thanks.
do you want to add anything there? Or?
Well, just to say, it's such a challenging area. I mean, if you look at some of the work of Fred Provenza, who worked with animals in grazing landscapes with scrub, there's probably well over 100,000 different phytochemicals, you know, phenols, terpenes, tannins, and that sort of stuff. Some of them are medicaments for ruminant animals, but to measure even one or two of those in the laboratory is enormously expensive. So we're going to have to wait for some sort of screening technology, you know, whatever it's going to be, chemical, physical, that can help us. So it's not just a simple situation that technology or interest has lagged on. It's been an impediment. It's been the technology to measure this vast array of chemicals, which makes up healthy food.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in some ways you can go down the pathway of more and more specific technicality, or you can go down the pathway of what are the general principles that are being applied and how can we view what that means. So I'm thinking in terms of, you know, viewing land from space and knowing what its greenness is. There's a lot more technology going into remote sensing and understanding what's happening at a ground level from what's happening in space. And so maybe it's, you know, geolocating where food is coming from and knowing that that particular patch of ground, given its climate and its soils, is actually got a lot of greenness in it. It's got a lot of photosynthesis happening. It's actually contributing positively to the carbon cycle. You know, those sorts of measures might even be better than, you know, trying to go down the pathway of what vitamin level it is in a particular food. You know, I don't know. It's just a thought.
Even simplifying it further, I know there's often trouble with these as well, but there is a label that's coming out of America called Regenerative Organic, which you might be aware of, and that's an initiative with Rodale, Patagonia, Bronner's, a few others, and they just have quite a simple stipulation of the way the animals are treated, the soil health, and then I think there's a social value too about the workers as well. And they're about to actually spend a lot of money to launch in America in the next.
Hannah Beth, I know there's some hands up there, Hannah Beth.
Peter, I wonder if I could I just make one comment? Probably the very simplest and best measurement technology are our taste buds. When you're eating really rich, nutrient-dense food, and we have been co-evolved for millions of years to detect all those phytochemicals and chemicals. And I know we can't metricate that, but it's a hell of a good tool.
Great. Thanks, Charlie. And thanks, Clark, for your question. Bronwyn, the question's next, and followed by Anne.
Yeah, thanks, Damon, for that. Look, just a quick question. I'm really interested in the kelp side of it. I'm involved with some committees working with the federal department for carbon credits type thing. But what I'm really interested in, my background's leukemia, really interested in the kelp in that I know that it's got sort of anywhere from 90% onwards reduction in enteric methane emissions. But has that then been balanced with the actual processing, the impact on the environment of the processing, and then actually having to get it to the grazier? You've got graziers who don't supplement, who then would have to supplement. And I suppose I'm coming from a very biased point of view because obviously leukemia reduces enteric emissions by 28%. So you're talking something you plant once, it's good for 30 years, aside from the other issues that may be there, to something that you have to continually supplement, you have to continually produce.
Yeah, look, it's a great question. I'm probably, it's not my complete area of expertise, but the time I have spent with the scientists in this space, especially down in the University of Tasmania, they are asking these questions. And what they're even starting to discover is that the Sphaerogopsis taxiformis, which is the one that's getting all the attention because of the lowering of the methane, they're saying that there might be a sort of a side effect that people are starting to discover. I think they're called bromines or bromphenones, and they're saying that that's actually a greenhouse gas that they're finding is coming off the seaweed, which might be quite deleterious as well. So they're looking at other brown seaweeds, not just this one variety that isn't releasing these things. So like with anything, we've got to explore the unseen consequences that it might seem really exciting and great goes up, but there might be some consequences we're not aware of at the time. So I know this research is starting to emerge at the moment. There's a group in Tassie, you'd know, probably in Queensland as well, but I don't think it's as black and white yet as this sort of miraculous solution for lowering methane emissions. But certainly for a host of other reasons, the kelp is just incredibly exciting in terms of what it does to alkalise the ocean water, create a habitat for the fish to lay their eggs, plus also sequestering at just such incredible rates. They can grow 0.5 metre a day, up to 50 metres long, which is why it's getting all the attention it is. But there are lots of, there's a couple of different seminars being put together at the moment. Tim Flannery's doing one where a lot of the ocean experts and engineers are coming together right now to ask these kind of questions and to see what the consequences might be if we roll this out at a large scale.
Thanks, Damon. Charlie, did you want to anything there? No.
No, except I am aware through CSIRO and other work that Australia has some wonderful Asparaginopsis species that we haven't really started to explore them yet. So it must be an exciting field, I think.
Great, thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Damon. Anne Coote, did you want to ask a question?
Thank you, Hannah Beth, and also thank you to Damon and Charlie for being available for us today. I have been fortunate to actually meet and listen to Charlie's talks at a number of locations, and highly recommend others take the opportunity if they can. And obviously also Damon's work has been widely recognised as well. So my background is working in agronomy and extension in farming in a quite industrial landscape in northwestern New South Wales. Charlie, I know that if we talk about paradigm shifts and the hurt factor for change, but it's really interesting that I've just picked up a peer review report that we're doing in Science and Society in this class, and I've actually looked at a study that was conducted in 2019 by Wollongong and Oregon universities, where they've showed that transitioning is really linked to a holistic approach, and the processes of change and persistence are associated with personal, practical and political influences. And the personal and political influences particularly influence the practical application. So how can we progress these aspects, given that we have got a known range of wonderful practices that we can apply to actually make some positive change?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was actually involved with that paper a little bit in the interview and other processes. And I think you've really addressed something critical. If you wanted to summarise the difference between industrial ag and a regenerative ag, and I don't want to make it a schism, but one of them is really reductionist, whereas the regenerative approach is more about holism, complex adaptive systems. And basically a lot of our education, and I was privileged to do the first course in Australia in the early 70s in human ecology, and I know Peter and others have been involved, but it's very rarely taught. We're really taught under a more reductionist, more hard scientific approach. And I think if we started to respect nature as being extraordinarily complex, self-organising systems that's almost impossible to understand, but you can understand the principles rather than thinking we can carve it up in a reductionist manner, that would cause a huge shift if that was taught, children right from primary school to respect nature and get off the devices. It would be a good start. But if you could go right through teaching holistic thinking, a sort of human ecology approach, I think that would trigger that approach that those researchers and what you allude to, because it changes your entire way of perception and thinking about how the world works, etc.
Great, thanks, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie.
I might jump in there too, Anne. As a person who naturally spans both the technical and engineering and science and arts and humanities and social sciences, we are, through our education system, very often channeled into one or the other. It's not considered reasonable to pursue both or multiple aspects of your personality. And so I think we've been channeling people down either the technical or the humanities or the social without realizing that people need to span all of those. and that we all do to some extent, and our education system should reflect that as well.
I think that's a good point, Peter, and that's one reason why I'm here doing this course now. Is my journey of life, and particularly the last 10 years working with regenerative farmers and being one ourselves, or aspiring to. The importance of the transition and how we do that is really critical to the process.
Yeah.
I think Peter's making an important point. It's not a rejection of the best of science. It's using them all together as a complex toolkit, if you like, and which leads to an overall broader, more holistic vision of how things work.
Yeah, absolutely. Bringing together all those knowledges. Fantastic, thank you. And next I have a question from Ruth.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I just wanted to speak into the conversation just a little earlier about identifying products in the market that are being regenerative. And I did come across information from the Savoury Institute, their program called Land to Market, and their ecological outcome verification tool, which is a measure of increasing water holding capacity, carbon, biodiversity on the land of the farmers that participate. I just wonder whether any of you know anything further about that, or whether that's been gaining any traction.
I don't. Charles, do you?
No, look, I've worked with the Savoury people a little bit, watching them develop it, but I can't speak as to how far down the track it is yet. I think it's still being ground-proof, but I'm sure that companies like Patagonia, who I've worked with a bit, and others like that are watching it closely, because they certainly need good QA systems that can be relied on.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Fantastic. All right, I can't see any more questions from students. Thank you, Ruth. Before we haven't got too much time left, so I just would like to just go back to you, Charlie and Damon, and just ask if you have any sort of final comments that you'd like to make.
Do you want to go, Damon?
I think I guess just being cognizant of the time we find ourselves in, and there's a great quote by William Davies, and he says, to experience a crisis is to inhabit a world that is temporarily up for grabs. And I think that we are going to go one of two ways after this. We're either going to double down on the system, which is probably the likely option, which is what we did after the last shock. But I think if anyone that has this type of knowledge or an understanding of this space, now is the time to share it and get it out there, post it on social media, contribute to that collective intelligence, these new ideas, because this is the time where people are open to hearing new things. And I think it's up to all of us to communicate it better than we have been, and to get people excited by it, and to know that they will be better off, and their landscapes and their communities and their food will be better from this solution. So I would just encourage everyone to be brave right now and be bold, and share this stuff as much as you can.
Fantastic. Thank you, Damon. We do have one question from Graham Lancaster before we go to your final sum up. Thank you, Damon. Graham?
Thanks, Charlie and Damon. Graham Lancaster here. Look, great talk. I've heard it all before. We really want it to happen. With the nutrient density, I'm very concerned that they're going to not target the correct aspects of the nutrient density. And I've been trying to research at what the hell they're going to target with an infrared probe, which is what they're looking at, hopefully to hook it onto a mobile. So how can we find out more information on how to validate this sort of testing, or to move forward? Because I think it is a tool we need, but if it's not done correctly, we could all come undone with it.
Yeah, I mean, I would, I will maybe share, I'll have to just go back through my emails to look at, because I've been sent some things about who is doing the deep dive on it at the moment, which organisations, and I could probably share that with Hannah-Beth, and then she could pass it on to to the students that are interested. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know there is a couple of companies working on it, and a couple of universities as well that are working on it. There's an organisation there's a discussion going on behind the scenes, and they are using Monash and someone else, I can't think of who right now, to look into this. So leave it with me and I'll send what I've got on to Hannah-Beth.
Thank you.
Graham, I can't add any more except to say that it's a good question, and it's the good questions that we need. We've got to keep asking these hard questions. I'm not abreast of some of the, other than I know one person that's in the train of developing it. I can't explain the technology to you, but you're quite right. If we get it wrong, it's going to do more damage than good.
Yeah. I will add to that, because I've seen CSIRO studies on nutrient density where all they do is add up all the potassium, calcium, phosphorus, and all the rest. When you load bloody inorganic nutrients onto a paddock, you will load nutrients into the fruit. Doesn't mean they're any more healthy. They don't taste any better. They're very artificial. So if we start targeting those things, we're just going to target more inorganic use of fertilizers.
Yeah.
Thanks, Graham. That's, yeah, some very important questions moving into the future. Thank you. And Charlie, what do you want to share some concluding comments?
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, I'm mindful as we're now sitting here in alleged isolation, etc., and what's going on around the world and the tragedy of it. You know, the opening lines of Tale of Two Cities by Dickens was, it's the best of times, but it's the worst of times. And this might be one of those worst times that, yeah, hopefully we won't retreat into our tortoiseshell. It could be the head-cracking event that's going to trigger more change. And I'm optimistic that because of the ball that's rolling, as Damon alluded to, his work and Paul Hawken and everyone else in this space, that it's gathering a momentum that those of us that are sort of lecturing and talking and workshopping, we think we've gone past the early adopter phase. It's getting into the early majority phase. And that can really sort of get going exponentially if all these elements, you know, whether it's filmmaking, writing, and the workshops, the doing, the videos, all the rest of it, Facebook, the whole box and dice. I think it's all gathering momentum. So I'm incredibly optimistic. And just to reiterate, this new approach to agriculture, this new old approach rather, and an understanding of how complex systems work, we really do have the best solutions to turning around the Anthropocene. And we haven't mentioned that word, but we are definitely into this new dangerous era of destabilized Earth systems. And to be part of that collectively, which is why I think everyone's watching, has to add a lot of meaning to life and present some really exciting opportunities in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Charlie, Massey, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, Damon. And thank you everyone that's attended. It's been really great to have your questions as well. And yeah, really positive message from both of you. So thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Damon. Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.